All right, welcome back. So today we move on to the final section of the Eightfold Path. Um, and these are the three elements that discuss practice. Although I guess if you consider practice sort of everything, applying the teachings to your life, not just on the cushion, um, then that's the kind of practice we're talking about. Hi, Jennifer. Um, so we start today with the first of the three elements related to practice, which is holistic effort. So holistic effort is one of my favorite topics personally because it's just incredibly practical. It's something that I have found that works for me, not just about this stuff, but kind of about everything. Um, it's like the sort of thing I think we should be taught in kindergarten or whatever age, first grade. But basically, we're discussing how to apply our attention, whether it's in meditation or anything else. And there are tons of tips and tricks here that work, in my experience, pretty much in every corner of life. So, the growth that we've been talking about for weeks now can only happen by our own effort. My first teacher used to say, if the Dalai Lama could stick his finger in your ear and you'd be enlightened, he would do it. I just like that image of that. Like, yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. Whatever we want to do to our own being with our own being, it's up to us to do. Other folks can share their understanding of the teachings with us, and they can walk the path with us. But changes in our nervous system and our mind and our view and our behavior come from our effort alone. So hopefully that's like empowering rather than daunting, that this is really each of us sort of going through these practices on, together and on our own, and our own effort will bear fruits for us as long as it's holistic effort, which is what we'll talk about today, which is mostly going to be don't try too hard, but we'll talk more than that. So first of all, cultivating the path is a long-term process. And you read books about people who have sudden awakenings, if you're the kind of person who reads that kind of book, and it sounds like you're going to have some, if things go right for you, you're going to have some crazy experience and come out the other side and be totally different and then live happily ever after. To me, that's what these books sound like. And just like, that's ridiculous. Just to be clear, that sells books, but it's ridiculous. And even the people, I mean, I'm not saying that there can't be transformative one-time experiences, because there can. In my first meditation retreat, I had a couple of related experiences that completely changed how I saw myself in the world. So fine. But that was like stepping onto the path. That wasn't the end of the story. That was the beginning of the story for me, because then I could start to address, where how I behave in the world didn't line up with maybe how I could be or something like that. So big experiences they're not at all required for the path, by the way. And they're often a problem because people think they're special, or they think they've gotten somewhere where they haven't, because that's just an experience and that's not the point. The point is what we've been talking about here for these weeks, which is very slowly and gradually transforming our lives to be more in line with how we want them to be. And thinking that we've somehow achieved something and now we float around in some kind of bliss, like that's just not like, we don't, looking for that isn't helpful, and having that is probably really unhelpful, because then that's why all these teachers end up misbehaving, because they get high on practice and then aren't paying attention. Anyway, maybe that was a little bit of a side note. So in order to approach this long-term growth process, oh yeah, last thing about what I was saying, is that it's not happily ever after. And anyone who I think is honest, even about like who claims to be enlightened, which is great, and I don't think should be a taboo to claim that, even then it just unfolds. So even if you think you've hit some endpoint, there is no endpoint, because then you're expressing what you've understood through your life. There's no point in just at that point, you don't just sort of stop living. but then you apply what you know in your life. So even if there is some sort of total understanding that is some final understanding point, there's no end to the acting it and growing it. And Adyashanti will say that he's one of the few people who like claims to be enlightened, and he doesn't. He says there's no end point. So in order to approach this long-term transformative path in a healthy and effective way, what we need to do is apply steady but relaxed effort. And by the way, steady doesn't have to mean every minute. It doesn't mean that you don't go have a glass of wine with a friend or go to a movie or do all the other things that might appeal to you to take time off. I mean, that's part of being sustained, is to occasionally take a break, especially if you feel you need it. So when I say steady, I just mean sustained over time. And so this is a hallmark of holistic effort: steady and relaxed. So what we don't want to do, and you see it all the time, is people go out all or nothing, like a crash diet, and then it's essentially bound to fail within a few weeks or months or possibly days. Seriously. People get super gung-ho about spirituality, and then a month later they're gung-ho about something else. Um, and sometimes these people actually show up again 10 years later, I've found, and that's pretty interesting because the drive was there. But ideally, if these things have appealed to you, which if you're here on day 10, right, you've stuck with me, then it must appeal to you on some level, or you have nothing else to do. We want to be able to actually apply these teachings, and that takes long-term practice. So we want to turn toward the training of our hearts and minds in a sustainable way, and we need to figure out what that is for us. So, for example, when we talked about the ethics, we talked about potentially taking on one thing at a time. So you might work on telling the truth for a month, and then maybe you spend a month attempting to speak to create harmony rather than division among folks. Maybe then you spend a month practicing generosity. These are just examples. But if we don't bite off more than we can chew, then we gain steady confidence in our ability to train our attention and adjust our understanding and our actions little by little. And, from on the flip side, if we take too much on, I will never speak in anger again for the rest of my life. Or I'll never shop again if I have an addiction to shopping, just examples. Then we'll judge ourselves when we're not able to achieve the unrealistic goal. And, this is what happens with like New Year's resolutions or some diets again too. We want to set goals that are reasonable, and don't worry if things don't turn out the way you plan. Real change takes time. And, I really can't say that enough. And that doesn't mean you can't have leaps. And often we do make leaps. I found this in like flexibility in teaching yoga for all these years, that you can like double your flexibility in some muscle all of a sudden. You've been working all along, and then it sort of happens, if that was a goal for you. So there can feel like discrete leaps, but often a lot led up to it. But for something to stick, it's probably not something we took on yesterday. That's just not really how real change works. So that's good news because it's realistic. And a hallmark of being in touch with reality. So how do we fuel long-term work like this? In order to fuel sustained effort, the key thing is to be motivated. And so how are we motivated? The Buddha taught that effort is based on confidence. So your being here in this class is inspired by some kind of confidence, or again, you wouldn't be here, you'd be doing something else. So how does that happen? Maybe you read about Buddhism or heard about it and thought it might be helpful for you. Or maybe someone told you that meditating helped them to feel better, and that interested you. And maybe you've been on the path for a while, right? But when you first started, something gave you the idea that it might be helpful, or you wouldn't have bothered. So that's the first spark of confidence, but it needs to be supported by your own experience or else it fizzles out. So you want to look to see over time, am I learning about myself through this practice in a way that's helpful? Is it showing up in my life in any way that's helpful? So when you see any benefit to your inner or your outer life, that fuels future effort because it feels worthwhile. So that's confidence. The word for confidence, by the way, is shraddha, which is usually, that's the Sanskrit, and it's usually translated as faith. But faith isn't referring to sort of faith in something you can't see or faith in something you're supposed to believe in. It's more like confidence. It's something that feels useful, either because it was useful to someone else, so it might be for you, or then over time because you see some kind of benefit. And if you don't see any benefit from any of these practices, don't do them. And I don't mean like after 2 days, but if after 3 years of doing this, you haven't seen any benefits, I mean, if you still like it, maybe talk to someone and see where maybe you have been not applying the practices in a way that's helpful, or some kind of misunderstanding, or too high a bar that you're setting for benefits. But otherwise, if you haven't seen any benefits, maybe try, Tai Chi or therapy or something else. Like meditation isn't the answer for everyone. It doesn't have to be the answer to you, or Buddhism for that matter. So that's the confidence that inspires motivation. And if we don't see benefits, it's hard to get excited to, maybe meditate every day or something. Like it should feel. And it doesn't have to, this is important. It doesn't have to show up as beneficial on the cushion. Let's say every day you sit down for 10 minutes and it's just brutal and you hate it. And it doesn't feel like it's getting better, but your life seems like it's getting better. That's the judge. That's what you want to look for. It doesn't matter at all if you're getting more concentrated on the cushion, more loving kindness, whatever you're practicing. The point is what it looks like off the cushion. Is it changing your being in a way that's helpful? And that's the thing to look for. So it's important to acknowledge that the benefits of our practice are based on the effort that we've put in. Sometimes, and we talked about this last week with Lauren, sometimes it seems like we should downplay our own achievements so that we don't seem narcissistic or, self-involved or something. But the Dalai Lama says we have to rejoice in our accomplishments so that we're motivated to continue. So we really want to actually take the time and say, you know what, I was more patient yesterday, and that, that person who I usually have difficulty with, it went much smoother. Like I did that through practice. And if we acknowledge that, it helps to motivate us to continue and enjoy it, not just acknowledge it, enjoy it. So another way to describe holistic effort is to try in a balanced way. And this is an incredibly helpful skill, in my opinion, to train ourselves to use our mind and our attention as effectively as possible. So I used to think that if I had to get something done, I should try really hard, and that was the way to do something well or quickly. But it turns out that the mind works better if we do what you might call trying easy as opposed to trying hard. So basically, and it's a little bit hard to describe, but I like to think of it as the mind being spacious instead of tight. So if we don't try, we just space out, nothing happens. But if we try too hard, the mind strains and it's not as creative, it's not as effective. And in addition, we sort of run out of steam or glucose or whatever it is that the mind burns when we think about stuff. Whereas if you try easy, you find that you have sustained energy, which is really helpful. So check this out for yourself sometime. It's very obvious to see in meditation if you're doing like concentration practices, but it works. It works for everything as far as I can tell. Plus, it's more pleasant, actually, which makes, getting anything done more pleasant and life more pleasant. Why wouldn't we want to do that? So if we use our mind and attention with a light and steady application, then we find a continuous stream of mental energy. That's just how it works. And again, check it out for yourself. You can tell when you're doing this correctly because it actually feels good to pay attention. And again, this is going to be easiest to learn on the meditation cushion when you're not doing something else. You're just, say, watching your breath or something. And it just you find a way to place your mind that it feels good. And that's the sign that you've got the effort right. You'll also find that you're able to stay focused for longer periods of time if you do this. And the way to figure it out is trial and error. So again, using your meditation practice to tinker with how to apply the mind. And then I recommend using that sort of mind to do everything. The Buddha described it this way. He compared it to tuning a stringed instrument. So he said, if the strings are too tight, they break. And if the strings are too loose, there's no music coming out of the instrument. So we want to tune the strings of our attention just right. And there's a kind of adjusting as you go that happens as well. So whether it's, start in meditation, but then, throughout your day, check in from time to time and notice, am I trying enough to kind of get stuff done and pay attention? Or am I, too spaced out? Or am I trying too hard and getting stressed and getting exhausted and needing to stop? It's said that wholesome effort leads to generosity, self-discipline, kindness, concentration, and understanding. So there's all these classic lists in Buddhism. They like to, so that you can remember things. And then it's said in that same teaching that unwholesome effort leads to desire, aggression, and ambition. Now, anytime desire is in here, I think we may have talked about this in the first class. There was a question about desire, so it's sort of already been covered. But desire, that just means it doesn't mean it's wrong to want things. It's more like that kind of not being satisfied state. It's fine to want things. It's healthy to want things. I recommend it, just not sort of letting it take over and not being happy with anything. So in terms of ambition, it's fine to have goals, right? We want to know why we're practicing. We want to know what's important to us. We want to know what areas of life we'd like to improve. Okay. But that's not really ambition. That's considered like discriminating wisdom. That's like things you want to know and figure out and orient toward. That's helpful. Ambition here, what it means is more like, I'm going to become perfect and I'm going to do it faster than you are. And this kind of comparative spirit is not considered holistic effort, although it is rampant in our culture, right? You're going to do something, you should be the best at it, definitely be better than the person next to you, which is kind of weird when, how the person next to you is doing affects how you do. And if we can all do things together, it's going to be a lot easier. And not everyone can be the best at something, and why should we? So I think it's great to question some of these things that we may have digested without thinking about because we were 5 or whatever. So ideally, we're all on this path together, doing our best and supporting each other, and that's more realistic and holistic, as opposed to the ambition of sort of getting out in front of everyone else and doing it better. So to make sustained, friendly effort in this way, one thing we really need to do is relax our expectations around the results of the practice. The Dalai Lama says to check in on your progress once every 10 years. I think it's okay to do it more often than that. Like if you haven't had any benefits in 5 years, talk to somebody or do something else. But the thing is, when I personally have expectations for a particular session or a particular character trait that I'm trying to work on, I end up completely demoralized. If the expectation isn't met, which, I mean, it's not going to, because those expectations are always like very specific. Like by next week, the next time I talk to this person, I'm going to, get it right. For something that I've been really working on for 40 years. Like, no, I might get it right. I might get it wrong. But long term, It's going to improve, right? Through my effort. Just, I don't know when. And I don't know how. And that's part of the fun of it, really. Um, so we need to lighten up a little bit. Excuse me. So we want to practice staying open and curious to what's happening now, because that's a lot more interesting than just setting artificial goals and then freaking out when they don't happen and thinking we're not doing it right. Um, there's this whole thought about all of these changes that might be slowly occurring in our being as like seeds that are planted underground, right? And so you're watering them. There might be some fertilizer going on, and making sure the light's okay. And it's like, but the seed is germinating underground, and so doing it right means you don't see it sprout through the dirt until it's time. Like that's how it works, right? So it's the same way with all of this stuff, is that a lot often the growth is happening sort of in the dark, and that's appropriate, and that's how it works, and then we get to wait and see when it sprouts. So in addition to relaxing our expectations, it helps to release our judgments around our practice, whether it's about where we are right now in our lives, or how we think our path compares to the person next to us. And again, when I say judgments, I don't mean that we shouldn't know what's happening. So we'll call that, again, discriminating wisdom. So it's great to know what's happening, have a sense of what's going on. But when I say release judgments, I mean that critical voice that demoralizes us and derails our energy and our effort. So I want you to be, all of us, to be compassionate to our critical voice, right? Love it, give it a hug, say, I know you're there. You don't have to hate it or push it away, but just don't buy into the story it tells you. Like any form of reactivity, that's a form of reactivity. So give it a hug. Never mind, not now. That's not what I'm doing. It's not what we're up to. It just doesn't work. We're not neuroplastic when we're in a negative, or not so neuroplastic in a negative mental state. We're much more neuroplastic in a positive mental state. So if we can sort of care about what's happening and be generous to ourselves, change will happen much more effectively, which is, I think, great news. So when we talk about holistic effort in the sutras, the Buddha describes 4 great endeavors toward which we can apply our holistic effort in the way that we've been describing. So another classic list. The first great endeavor is to prevent the arising of unarisen, unwholesome mental states. What does that mean? In other words, to stop reactivity before it starts. So that's the first of the 4 things we can do. How can we stop reactivity before it starts? Start to get to know, what situations set you off, what locations, interactions, activities, individuals. When do you lose the plot? When do you get completely unattached to reality and reactive? And maybe you decide to avoid those situations if you don't feel up to them for some reason. You're not feeling well, you didn't sleep well, you are dealing with other stresses. Maybe you say, you know what, I'm going to reschedule tea with so and so until I'm having a better day so that it doesn't go south. And that can be a very skillful thing to do, to know, I need to be well rested before I go have dinner with that person, whatever. If you can reschedule and then have a better time, it's fine. Or maybe instead of rescheduling, you prepare yourself in advance in ways that work for you, like taking some deep breaths, or meditating beforehand, or making sure you get a walk out in nature that day, or whatever, whatever works for you. You listen to some calming music before you go, or talk to a friend, or whatever it is that helps you to keep your cool. So you sort of identify where the risky situations and people are, and you either, sort of wait till you're at your best, or help yourself to be at your best so that those things go well. So that's preventing reactivity. The second great endeavor is to, and I'm just going to give you like the formal lingo first, and then put it in real words, to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen, which is, in other words, letting go of reactivity. So, how, when you're already fired up, pissed off, or afraid, or jealous, or whatever your thing is, what can you do? One thing you can do in mindfulness technique, name the mental state in your mind. Just say angry or anger, jealous, scared, whatever the thing is that's happening, craving, desire, to acknowledge it's there and become more rational about it. I mean, it's so interesting, but it's been proven through these functional MRIs that if you're freaking out and your amygdala is firing, I'm pointing like to the back of your brain, your like fear center has all the activity. And then you literally say the name in your mind of the emotion, then your rational prefrontal cortex lights up and the amygdala is not lit up anymore. It's crazy, but it actually works to literally just name it. I'm not saying that's going to make everything perfect, but that's one of the first things that you can do. And it's a fantastic technique. So that's one thing you could do. Another thing might be becoming aware of our body and mind, how we feel, with compassion instead of judgment. So that could be like, oh, like I'm holding tension in my hands and I've stopped breathing and I'm sweating and I'm turning colors. Like, to even just stop and consider all of that takes your mind off of the kind of spinning mental stories that are fueling the reactivity and grounds us in a bit more of reality. And it feels good. Then what else could we do? Maybe we pause and give ourselves a moment to consider what might be a helpful action to take given this entire circumstance I find myself in. So, am I able to calm myself down enough to act wisely right now? Look to see. Or do I need to go for a walk to collect myself before I say anything I might regret later? And again, notice those are very rational questions to ask yourself, even though you're not in a rational state, sort of by definition of the reactivity. And that draws you into a more rational state, even though you've still got the stress hormones going or whatever hormones are related to the reactivity. So it's sort of a paradox, but in the middle of being freaked out, you can sort of calmly talk yourself through a course of actions. And the more you meditate, the easier that gets. And the more you practice doing that, the easier that gets. And I think it's actually really fun to see. And I've had this happen a number of times now, where I'm in the middle, and it hasn't happened in a while because I don't tend to get myself in these same situations anymore, which is interesting now that I reflect on it. But there was a period of time where I would be like halfway through some kind of argument and just suddenly realize, like, I don't want to do this. Do you want to do this? And the other person says no. Then it's like, okay, let's stop. Okay. Like, that's totally doable, which is crazy. That it took me, 40 some years to figure that out. And, and, having done that a number of times, then it's easier to even stop going there because it's going to get to that place, and that it'd be even more fun to not go there. Then again, this is all about raising our sort of awareness, our consciousness of our patterns and what makes us crazy and how to stop, and know that we can stop, actually, that you can train yourself to do it. Um, and that it's such a relief, actually, to not go there, to the places that are damaging. And I'm not saying I never do, but a lot less. And that's just a huge relief to me for not feeling like a jerk, right? So remember from our first few classes, we don't have to get rid of the reactivity. It doesn't work anyway, but that's not the method. We just need to let go of identifying with it, taking it to be me, taking it to be the only real way to be right now. So we don't need to feed it or reinforce it. We can kind of let it be there, and then it doesn't own us and it passes on its own. So the third great endeavor is to arouse wholesome states that have not yet arisen. This means to encourage what I like to call pro-social mental states, which are things like forgiveness and kindness and compassion and joy and peacefulness. And while these states will arise naturally in the absence of reactivity, I recommend actively cultivating them through meditation practices. And that way, the neural networks are primed and it's easier to feel them. And if that's something you're interested in, on my website, for those of you actually listening, I have a course on my website called Meditations of the Heart. And the password is Big Love, one word, BIGLOVE. It's 30 days. So if that's something that appeals to you, go on there. They're 15 minutes a day. And check them out. And if you want to do them with little talks, I have the same course on the Insight Timer, which is like free for a week and then $10 for a month. It's the same 30 days, same practices, but instead of the mindfulness sandwich around the heart practice, there's a 5-minute talk each day about the topic. So anyway, some resources to encourage pro-social mental states. Heart practices can be, they can push our buttons a little bit. Because we sort of see where the areas are that we need to work on, but I've found them very helpful. And the ones you don't need to work on, then you just get to marinate in a positive mental state, and that's pleasant as well. So I would do that maybe after we finish with this, because this is a more mindfulness-based course. So that was the third great endeavor. The fourth great endeavor is to maintain and perfect wholesome states that have already arisen. So, how do we stay positive and caring in our lives? First of all, we need to acknowledge when our minds feel happy and connected. And this is related to that third day that we did, that sort of experience of nirvana. So we need to acknowledge when we feel good, and we need to enjoy the feeling and immerse ourselves in us and really dwell there. We need to pay attention to when things are good, even if it's not dramatic. Even if there's no drama, it's just a nice, peaceful day where things are fine. Like, that's really something to enjoy and rejoice in. We are trained a little bit to want things to be like extraordinary. And that can take a lot of chasing then of things that aren't sustainable. And I think instead we can turn toward like, wow, I had a nice day. I feel pretty decent right now. Nothing's really going on. I mean, I'm reflecting on my own personal day. That was a great day, right? Like, I don't need something amazing to happen that then is going to be disappointing because the following day something amazing in the same way might not happen. That's not happiness. It's lovely when amazing things happen, but to appreciate just kind of spacious, relaxed, lack of conflict day. That's pretty great. So first we need to just notice that things are good. And then from time to time, the teaching is to juxtapose how you feel when things are good in comparison to reactive and negative mental states. So reminding ourselves how much better this is than being, outrageously pissed off for no good reason or whatever the thing is. And this helps us to motivate further practice of these states instead of going down the path of giving into habitual reactivity. So remember that the pull of our negative habits can be strong. And when I say negative, I mean the ones you decide are negative. I'm not talking about some external rule or anything, but the things you don't like when you go there. They have a strong pull because they are habitual. And they may feel just so normal, right? Maybe they're normal in our family or they're normal in our culture, but we know we don't like them. So remembering that the pull can be strong, and paying attention to how wonderful it feels when we have a spacious and loving mind instead. And that can help us to want to put in the time to feel this way more often. So it's kind of like motivating the practice. It takes effort, in summary, to cultivate the mind, to develop skill in living and relating to others. And of course, I'm talking about the areas you decide you need to work on, right? Like, we all have our strengths and our weaknesses. So I'm not saying we need to, revise everything, just the areas that give us trouble according to our own determination. At the end of his life, the Buddha said, strive forward diligently for your own liberation. He said, apply the teachings and be a guide to yourself. Seek no external refuge, he said. So what he means there is it's not up to someone else, to provide any of this for you. And of course, lots of people here to help you and to do this together. But it's through our own effort that we can improve our own lives and the lives of those around us. So, thoughts, comments, questions about holistic effort, Jennifer?
I'm getting so much out of this course, and I had an experience today on the mountain that I've never had before. And it's exactly what you were saying about the second step and becoming aware of your mental state. So my biggest problem is anger and lashing out and then feeling that boulder on my chest. Like, why did I do that? So today I was going down a trail and I was happy and it was beautiful. And then about 25 young, crazy people came down. And I was like the old man in the yard, like, hey, you kids, get out of my yard. Like, I was pissed and I wanted to yell and I wanted them to all know how unhappy I was. And out of nowhere, to which I attribute this class, I all of a sudden started saying out loud, I am so afraid. I am so afraid. I am so afraid. I was so afraid they were going to hurt me. And all of a sudden, whoosh, like it all of that anxiousness and anger just went away. And they were gone. And I hadn't yelled at them. And I felt totally liberated, like out of nowhere. That was a miracle moment. And now we're even talking about it. It's like, oh my God, I had to share this. So thank you for this class, because without it, that never would have happened.
That's beautiful. That is exactly what we're talking about. It's so crazy that to acknowledge fear is actually feels kind of good.
It was crazy. Like, I've been fighting this for 56 years. Like, oh no, I'm not afraid. Of course, I'm terrified, and that's why I get so angry. It was an amazing experience, and I didn't do it consciously. It just happened. So it was really, really interesting. What a freedom.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, one of the important takeaways from that is it wasn't like she was trying to do it in the moment. It's that seeds have been planted,
Right.
right? We're planting seeds and then they sprout in our lives. And that's how it works. That's how it's worked for me. And there are times when I try, but it's more of like that long-term sort of considering and yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
If I had tried to do it, I don't think it would have worked. The fact that it just took over, I attribute it to this class because it never has happened before, but it was, so thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. But then again, right? It was because of the effort made to really pay attention and consider these ideas. So it also wasn't not trying, just not maybe trying in the way that we think. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone? All right, let's do a little practice. So let's arrange the body such that the posture is alert without being rigid. Find a gentle, natural lift through the spine that feels sustainable without feeling forced. Relax any tension in the body. Let the body be soft around the energized spine. Put aside any goals for this session, any need to achieve anything in particular right now. Instead, practice having a relaxed, open, and curious mind, attentive, but not ambitious in that way. Let's bring our awareness to the sensations of breathing in the body. So, paying attention to the sensations of breathing and allowing the body to breathe naturally. For some of us, that can take a minute to kind of let the breath, to not sort of direct the breath when we pay attention. For other people, it's easier. For some, it's harder. No problem either way. But allow the breath to become natural even as you watch it. And then we'll tinker a bit with how we're watching the breath, tips to help us to do so with holistic effort. So, to begin with, observe the sensations of breathing in a gentle way. Don't force the mind. Simply turn toward the sensations of breathing right now. Don't worry about the past. Don't be concerned about the future. If, while you're making this effort to watch the breathing, you find yourself somewhere else entirely, which happens, I want you to simply return to the breathing in a friendly way without chastising your mind. So don't be critical of the mind. It's normal. Just return gently, friendly to the breath. Notice if you have any expectations about how this meditation should go. Instead of identifying with these expectations and taking them to be you, practice being interested instead in what's happening in a relaxed way. Notice if you have any judgments about how your mind should be right now. Instead of taking these judgments personally, practice simply knowing how your mind is right now, but in an open and curious way. So we're not trying to get rid of the knowing, just the kind of critical voice or overly fixed expectation. And again, we're just going to observe the rise and fall of the breath, sensations of breathing in the body. Classic practice to gather the attention. Notice that if you try too hard, the mind feels tight, small, hard, tense. If we try too hard, we might feel restless or irritated or agitated. Those are kind of hallmarks of that. You can also notice that if you don't try enough, your mind will either space out or get even more distracted. I mean, getting distracted is normal, but if you don't try enough, the mind just kind of wanders around and things won't be clear and you kind of, it's like fuzzy. It could even be pleasant in a dreamy way, but there's no real waking up happening. It can be kind of dozing off. So those are the extremes. Now I'd like you to practice balanced effort. And again, the method might be trial and error, finding a light and sustainable effort that feels pleasant to do. And again, that's a hallmark of this balanced effort, is it actually feels good to apply the mind that way. It's a pleasant sense, mental sense. Actually makes the mind happy. When you get the effort balanced, then try just leaving it and continue observing the sensations of breathing, gathering the attention with that sort of level of effort that feels balanced. And then every once in a while, you can check in and just see, does it still feel right? And if not, a little more, a little less effort. And then back to the kind of just using the mind in that way. Look to see, is there any sort of striving? Trying to get somewhere else, trying too hard? If there is, relax the striving and simply return to the breath. And then look to see if there's any sense of competition or achievement. And if you see any of this, even if it's subtle, practice releasing those attitudes and returning to the breath. Simple, relaxed attention. Any comments, questions, thoughts about that practice or anything else we've talked about this evening, afternoon?
I just noticed how pleasant it felt. It just felt very pleasant, like peaceful, but not sleepy, but peaceful, pleasant.
Yeah, that's it. And isn't it interesting that how you apply your attention can make you feel that way? And this is instructive on deep levels because we are looking all the time for people, circumstances, objects, experiences to make us feel a certain way. And it turns out paying attention makes us feel that way, paying attention in a nice way. And, I'm not saying to not have other things make you happy. I think lots of people, go for all of it. But that's a pretty interesting thing to think that actually the lens through which we experience affects how happy or pleasant and peaceful things are. And that's something we can do regardless of all the other things, which come and go, and some are manageable and most aren't. It's fascinating, I think. All right. Oh. Okay, two quotes from you. They're both from the Dhammapada. The first one is, "It's for you to make strong effort. The Buddhas only tell you how." And the second one, "With steady effort, one should do what is to be done, because the lax practitioner stirs up even more dust." Which means, Kelly looks, like do it, don't sort of halfway think about doing this and then not really do it. And, if you're interested and it interests your mind to do these practices, do them, apply them. Thank you. I'll see you on Monday, our final week together. Thanks.
Thank you.